Maybe you're here tonight wondering what it's all about. Who was he? Well, let me give you a quick tour in the book of John. Let's go to the book of John, chapter 1. This is page 748. Now I'm going to read the first couple of verses, and it's going to sound strange, but stay with me. Page 748, John chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, in the beginning, okay, way back in the beginning, was the, what's that word? Word. Was the Word, capital W. What does capital W tell you? John is speaking of God. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Okay, so far what we've learned is way back in the beginning there was God, and there was another figure called the Word. And they were together and they were both God. Next verse is verse 3. It says, through Him, who's Him? Through the Word, all things were made. So what does that tell you? The Word made all things. This is the Creator. It's called the Word. Without Him nothing was made that has been made. Okay, so there we have a picture of the Word. I'll explain that in a minute. There we have a picture of the Creator making all things. And we talked about that beautiful scene in the Garden of Eden where God forms the man from the dust and then He breathes into his nostrils and he becomes a living being. Now, in Genesis we have it said God did it. In John we get more detail. Which part of the Godhead? The Word. Now, the sad story we covered earlier in the piece was that mankind, although he'd been given a beautiful garden to enjoy, time with God every evening, and eternity stretching out in front of him, God had given him a test. He said, don't eat from this tree, otherwise all of this will end and you'll die. And as we read the sad story, mankind, through Eve and Adam, took the fruit and rebelled against God, and sure enough, they were doomed to die. Now the death that they were doomed to was not a death that you rise from, it was eternal death. And the only way for them to live with God for eternity was for somebody to pay the penalty of that death. The wages or the penalty of sin is eternal death. And without a moment's hesitation, you know what God does? When He discovers this is what's happening, He speaks to the man, He speaks to the woman, then He speaks to the serpent. And here when He speaks to the serpent is the first reference to what He will do on the cross. He says to the serpent, I will put enmity, I'll make you enemies between you and the woman, between your offspring and hers. He will crush your head and you will strike his heel. Jesus says, one of the offspring of this here woman, Eve, one of her offspring, he will crush your head and you will strike his heel. That's a reference to the cross. Satan would strike to take down the offspring. Who's the offspring of the woman referred to here? Jesus. We just read about it in John chapter 1, didn't we? The Word who was with God in the beginning. We're going to read in a moment who He is. He will crush your head. Okay? Now let's come to the next verse we're going to look at in John 1, verse 14. So come down a few verses. It says, the Word became flesh and made His dwelling among us. We've seen His glory, the glory of the one and only, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Get what this is saying. The one who made the heavens and the earth, the one who spoke and created this. This is the Whirlpool Galaxy, by the way. It has about something like 400 billion stars in it. And it's out there, and it's on its edge facing Earth. That's how the Hubble got such a good picture of it. The one who spoke these 400 billion stars and the millions and billions of galaxies like it into existence. The Creator of the universe. The Bible says He became flesh. And He appeared inside a virgin's tummy. Can you get that? If you can, you're a better man or woman than I am. I don't get that. But somehow God becomes flesh and He came to dwell amongst us. There was nothing sacred about the manger in Bethlehem when He was born. He could have been born in the best hotel room in the city if it had just been left open for him. You see, he's not pushy. He wasn't then, he still isn't now. He only makes his home in places that were made vacant for him. And the best hotel rooms in the city weren't open that night. But there was a little manger, a feed trough, in a stall that was open. So that's where he was born. Jesus walked amongst the common man. But there was nothing common about his words. In fact, his words upset every comfortable ethic. He upset the judicial systems. When he said, love those who hate you. He upset patterns of religion by declaring that real temples of worship are found only in believers' hearts. He refused to discuss laws and rules governing people's actions, but he zeroed in on their thoughts and their attitudes instead. If he'd been a philosopher, they could have debated him. If he'd been a warrior, they could have fought him. If he'd been a religionist, they could have ignored him as some kind of eccentric. But Christ was love. What do you do with that? The night he spent in Gethsemane was agony for Christ. He had to come to a place where he made the decision in prayer whether to go through with the plan, the reason he'd come, or whether to abort and go home. And as Christ wrestled with this decision, you know what he chose? Himself or you? Himself or you? And he knew that the only way to choose you was to die. And Christ wrestled with the temptation to go home like we'll never probably understand till we get there and we talk to him. And even then we probably never understand it. But there he decides in the garden, it's going to be you. Remember he prayed, Father, if there's any other way, let this cup of your wrath against sin, let it pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. And it wasn't the Father's will to spare Jesus. And so as the people came to arrest him, you know what his 12 disciples were doing? One of them, they were all there. One of them had actually led the people to arrest him. The other 11 scattered. And Jesus was led alone down to the temple guards who kept him there through the night until the wee hours of the morning. As the sun was beginning to rise, they eventually had the Sanhedrin assembled. Those few hours that Jesus was under the care of the temple guards, you know what they did? They put a sack over his head and they struck him from side to side and they said, prophesy, tell us, who hit you that time? From side to side, who hit you that time? Eventually Jesus is led into the Sanhedrin. And there these leaders, supposedly godly men, the ones in charge of teaching people what God is really like, they bring him in. They know what they want to do with him because they've been trying to do it for the last 2.5, 3.5 years since they got to know Jesus and his ministry. They want him dead. They need a reason to crucify him. They need a reason to get him on the cross so he can be done away with and they can get back to normal. Well, it's a mock trial. It's a pathetic justice system. They bring in the leaders, they bring in some false accusers, and before long, you know what they find him guilty of? Claiming to be the Son of God. Guilty. Blasphemer. And they take him away to Pilate. Pilate's the Roman governor. Pilate sees what's going on. He doesn't want anything to do with this man. He can't find anything wrong with him. And then Pilate says, hang on, you're from where? Galilee. He's from Galilee. Pilate can't believe his luck because the Tetrarch of Galilee, King Herod, happens to be in Jerusalem at the moment. Take him to Herod. I want nothing to do with this. So they march Jesus off to Herod. You can imagine this angry mob of Jewish leaders. They take him to Herod. Herod thinks this is great. He's been hearing all sorts of things about this teacher, the one who performs signs and wonders. And he looks at Jesus and he says, do something for me. Perform a sign and I'll believe in you. Just do something. Anything. And Jesus doesn't answer. Herod's getting frustrated. You want me to believe in you? Do something. Isaiah 53 is like the gospel in the Old Testament. It says that Jesus was like a lamb being led to the slaughter, but like a sheep before